there was a Conservative member of Parliament in the UK who was found dead, apparently as a result of some sort of autoerotic asphyxiation experience that had gone wrong. And the papers were full of this story, and they were calling him a sadomasochist. And there was discussion of what that meant. And I read these reports and I was horrified because I realised, okay, if he's a sadomasochist, I think that's what I am too. And the shame of that. I mean, I shouldn't have been ashamed because it's just a sexual choice. I mean, it's not even a choice, it's an identity. You can't help it. But because the articles were so cruel, he'd lost his life and people were just laughing at him like he was a joke. And that it was funny that he'd had this weird sexuality. And I thought, okay, well, I guess there were two of us. One of us is dead. I'm the other one. I'm the other freak. And I must just never tell anyone, ever. I grew up in a religious cult. My parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. So I know people don't tend to think of the Jehovah's Witnesses as a particularly bad cult, because there are certainly some that are more extreme and are worse. But the thing that I remember most, that had the greatest effect on me about growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, is we believed the world was about to end. So I grew up believing that I was never going to reach adulthood in the normal world. So I didn't think I was ever going to need a job. I didn't think I was probably ever going to be old enough to get married, have children of my own. And I didn't think I was going to have any choices over what happened in my life, because I'd been told Armageddon was going to come while I was still a child. God was going to just save the Jehovah's Witnesses, and we were going to live in paradise on earth, building log cabins and making friends with wild animals. And that was going to be our life. And honestly, I found that idea terrifying, because the idea of living forever and not having a purpose always seemed frightening to me. So honestly, I grew up pretty scared. I've got an older sister who's 4 years older than me. And so by the time she was 16, she had a secret Jehovah's Witness boyfriend. And when the elders of the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses found out that she was dating a Jehovah's Witness boy, they ordered the boy to break up with my sister. And I think it gave them enough distance just to consider whether we really should be in this religion at all. So they decided to leave. And so aged 13, I was suddenly not a Jehovah's Witness anymore. And it was fantastic, but it was also terrifying, because I was 13 and I suddenly realized I am going to grow up. I am going to need a job. I'd not bothered to do any schoolwork because I didn't think I was ever going to need any qualifications. And I had to get used to the idea that I was going to die one day, which I'd been told I would never have to face. So it was quite an adjustment to make. And we lost all of our friends as well, because if you leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, no Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to speak to you anymore. So it's quite an isolating thing to leave the religion, because it's like you have to start your life again from a social point of view. In common with a lot of religions, and especially in common with a lot of religious cults, your sexual options are very limited. So Jehovah's Witnesses have to be heterosexual. Homosexuality is completely banned and frowned on. You can't be a practicing gay Jehovah's Witness. Furthermore, there were a whole load of extra rules that we were told were really important. So I remember being 9 years old and being told that masturbation was something that no one should do. And if you did that, Jehovah would very much frown upon it. Oral sex was spoken about as something you shouldn't indulge in. I don't know why. Some sexual positions were discouraged as well. So again, I mean, I was far too young to be hearing discussions of this sort of thing, but Jehovah's Witnesses don't have any kind of Sunday school provision. So everyone of whatever age is in the same thrice weekly meetings. And so anything that gets discussed, the children are there for. So actually, as I look back, I think that's immensely sexually inappropriate. I was being given all this information when I was of an age where I didn't understand it. But yeah, basically, almost everything you might want to do sexually was banned. Only the most vanilla and typical and heteronormative type of sex was acceptable. And all of it had to be after marriage. So if you were dating someone in the Jehovah's Witnesses, you weren't meant to do anything before you got married. So people were kept very ignorant about sex. When we left the Jehovah's Witnesses, my parents immediately became fundamentalist Christians. So actually, from a sexual point of view, not much changed. It was still not okay to be gay. It was still not okay to have sex outside of marriage. So actually, from a sexual morality point of view, things were very similar. I'd always loved the idea of being tied up. So obviously I wasn't aware this was sexual. I just remember hearing the story of Peter Pan and thinking Captain Hook was obviously the most exciting character because he was tying people to the masts of his pirate ship. And I just thought, wow, that sounds amazing. So ever since my really early childhood, I had been aware that the idea of being tied up or the idea of being spanked was really appealing. None of this stuff happened to me. I had no idea if I'd enjoy the reality. I just always liked the parts of stories where that was involved, or in films if someone got tied up or kidnapped or punished in some way. I just liked it. I had no idea this was going to actually be the basis of my sexuality until I turned 16. And of course, I was going through puberty. And I started to realize that these things I was thinking about were sexual thoughts. And it was very poor timing because there was a Conservative member of Parliament in the UK who was found dead, apparently as a result of some sort of autoerotic asphyxiation experience that had gone wrong. And the papers were full of this story, and they were calling him a sadomasochist. And there was discussion of what that meant. And I read these reports and I was horrified because I realized, okay, if he's a sadomasochist, I think that's what I am too. And the shame of that. I mean, I shouldn't have been ashamed because it's just a sexual choice. I mean, it's not even a choice, it's an identity. You can't help it. But because the articles were so cruel, he'd lost his life and people were just laughing at him like he was a joke, and that it was funny that he'd had this weird sexuality. And I thought, okay, well, I guess there were two of us. One of us is dead. I'm the other one. I'm the other freak. And I must just never tell anyone, ever. This has got to be a secret I just take to my grave, because if I tell anyone, they're not going to want to date me. No one's going to want to marry me. No one's going to want to be friends with me. This is like the only thing I can compare it to, maybe, is if you discovered you were a paedophile. Like the horror of that. That's what it felt like. Just, this is something so disgusting. I must never act on these instincts. I must never tell anyone. I must shut this down. I mustn't be what I think I am. And so I had a very lonely few years of trying to do that, and not telling anyone and trying to ignore what my instincts were. And I think if I hadn't found my career, it's possible I might still be doing that, because the shame was so deep. Coming from such a strict religious background, the idea of being ashamed of what you are and trying to suppress it is very normalized. That's something that's very encouraged, that, you know, we're all basically sinful. Our instincts are kind of disgusting. And what we need to do is we need to curb those instincts and try to be better than what we are. And that's what I tried to do. So just as I discovered I was kinky in a very sudden way, I discovered I wasn't alone in a very sudden way. I'd trained as an actor, so I was doing classical Shakespeare performances, and I'd been approached by a few photographers about modelling. So I had taken a couple of photo shoots, and it was my second ever professional photo shoot in London, in Camden. And it was only a 2-hour shoot, and I got on really well with the photographer. And after the shoot, he said he was going to an exhibition. There was an opening, and he asked if I'd like to go with him. And I thought that would be fun. I'd never been to like a gallery opening before. And I thought, wow, that sounds sophisticated. So I went with him. I had no idea what this exhibition was about. And I walked through the door of this gallery, and it was a BDSM exhibition. And so on one side of that door, I'd been all alone in the world with my sexuality as far as I knew. And on the other side of that door, I saw representations of my sexual identity all over the walls. And the relief of that, of just knowing I wasn't alone, I guess it was one of the most profound moments of my life, because it just told me I wasn't by myself. And that was such a relief, because this work was beautiful. It's not like it was hardcore pornography. It wasn't particularly shocking. It was very stylish representations of BDSM. It was very entry friendly. It wasn't the sort of stuff that a beginner would be scared of. The beauty of it just told me that, one, I wasn't alone, but also this world wasn't just going to be full of awful, dangerous, depraved people. The BDSM community was full of people who were making beautiful art with some integrity. So I spent the evening walking around, meeting some of the artists. And by the end of the night, I had a lot of artists' business cards, and I'd been booked for some BDSM photo shoots. And so the first time I did BDSM, it was at a professional photo shoot. And it was everything I'd hoped that it would be. I was 25. And so 7 years of my adult life had gone by without having any clue that this stuff was on the internet. I could have found it with a couple of mouse clicks, and I just didn't know to go looking. So it was incredible. It was like, I guess, opening the door to a secret garden and finding all the things you'd hoped life would involve, but that you knew wouldn't be there. Suddenly finding that, your literal dreams were going to come true. And I remember I got hold of this thing called the Fetish Map of London, and it had on it all the different galleries and shops and nightclubs that were kind of kink friendly. And I was living in London, so I started going to all these places, and I started meeting the people who were going to become my community and my friends. It was just like I was starting my adult life all over again. It was the most amazing experience. And it's one of the reasons that I feel sometimes the way people talk about pornography, it's as though it's worthless and it's just this kind of quick fix that gives you an orgasm and then it's over. For me, discovering BDSM pornography, it gave me my friendship group, it gave me my community, it gave me my career, it gave me acceptance of my sexuality. Eventually, it gave me my husband. It kind of, for me, it was a very good discovery. It was and working in porn was my kind of sexual awakening, honestly. So I would describe myself as a submissive masochist. There are people who are just pure masochists, and the kind of power dynamic doesn't necessarily mean much to them. The idea of being in control or being controlled kind of leaves them cold. What they want is sensations. On the other hand, there are people who are submissive and who don't want to be hurt. They just want someone in charge of them, making the decisions in the bedroom. For me, I'm both, because I like to have someone take charge, and I also like to experience some sorts of pain. And then there are kind of my opposite number would be a dominant sadist. Dominant sadist, that's what I would be kind of looking for in a partner. Someone who likes being in control, likes making the decisions, and also likes inflicting some sorts of pain in some ways.
Hi, welcome to Deep.
This channel goes a level deeper.
Deep is a brand new YouTube channel that is dedicated to the amazing experiences of incredible individuals.
We basically try and answer the questions that you always want the answer to, but you don't feel like you can ask.
Myself and the team are responsible for a lot of the factual content that you might have seen on YouTube. Minutes With, The Gap, Agree to Disagree, among others. And we set up this new studio and this new channel to go a level deeper.
We will be uploading a new video every single week.
There'll be a wide range of stories, so please hit the subscribe bell.
Please let us know in the comments if there's anything you want us to cover, any stories that you've been interested in, any questions you wanted to ask.
We hope you enjoy. Now back to our story.
So until COVID, my job as a BDSM model involved traveling around the world, going and working with professional photographers and producers who were either creating bondage photographs or bondage videos. So I would obviously do my research quite carefully because there is an inherent risk involved in doing something like this, either because you might find yourself working with someone whose intentions are not good, which is honestly very, very rare. I've had very few bad experiences with people who had bad intentions. But you also have to be careful because someone with the best possible intentions can also do something horrifically dangerous to you just through ignorance. So I'm very careful with my research where I look at the skill level of the people who are wanting to tie me up and spank me. So fortunately, because they're producing this stuff online, I can go and watch it online and choose to work with the people who I think are shooting the sort of stuff that I'm comfortable producing myself. Then COVID happened and I had to stop touring for a while and I took a lot of my business in-house. So I started, instead of working for producers, I started shooting specifically for customers who would come to me directly. So they would want pictures of me wearing a ball gag or a video of me hogtied on a bed. And I started producing that myself. With my husband, who is a BDSM photographer and filmmaker. So we were very lucky that we were in isolation together during COVID. And so we shot a lot of stuff together and I shot a lot of stuff myself. So now, these days, I split my time between touring the world, working with producers and staying at home and producing my own work. So I don't do in-person sex work and I don't do full service sex work personally. In fact, I don't have any kind of sex on camera because my interests are really towards BDSM rather than the acts of penetration. That's not really my scene. It's not a moral choice. It's just that what I'm really into is being tied up and spanked. So for me, those are sex acts. But of course, to people who aren't into that, that doesn't look like sex. But I think it would be really disingenuous of me to pretend it's not pornography, because for someone who is kinky, that is kind of the ultimate in pornography. So since the end use of the productions I'm in is for people to to it, just because it's not hardcore, I really don't think I should be pretending it's something somehow superior or cleaner to hardcore sex. If I was into hardcore sex, that's what I would be shooting. But what I'm into is being spanked. I would definitely call it sex work. I feel like in recent years, as an act of solidarity, a lot of people who once upon a time wouldn't have called themselves sex workers, we are coming out and admitting that, well, it's all sex work. It's, if the intention of the work is to arouse people, then it's sex work. So I've been in it 20 years. And to begin with, for the first 5 or 10 years, I was probably making about 50 or 60,000 pounds a year. By 2017, I was making £100,000 a year, and now I'm making £250,000 a year, which feels amazing because I'm 47, which doesn't feel like the age people would expect a pornographic performer to be. So it makes me really happy that people tend to assume that a career like mine kind of peaks at 25, and I'm really happy to be able to tell people I started at 25 and I maybe am reaching my financial peak at 47, and maybe I'm not even at the peak yet. I don't know. On one hand, I don't think any of it's weird because we're all a sexual minority of one. Like, all of our sexual tastes are idiosyncratic. So when I say that something is strange, I don't mean it in a pejorative way. But through talking directly to customers who are ordering customs, I have become aware of how wide the variety of sexual tastes can be. And that is just endlessly fascinating to me. So last week, I was dressed as an equestrian in jodhpurs and riding boots. And the video involved me getting dressed in full PPE, so a plastic suit, boot covers, plastic gloves, and a mask. And that was the porn. Like nothing else happened. That's what the video was. For the customer, that was exactly what he wanted to see in his porn movie. Sometimes I'm just scolding the camera as though the camera was a person and as though I was a headmistress who was very disappointed with your work. Sometimes it's all about what I'm wearing. So I might be wearing a roll neck sweater and it's all about talking about the texture of the fabric, how it feels against my skin. And I think the kind of common themes that run through the work is, although I might be wearing very disparate outfits and I might be behaving in all sorts of ways, the common themes are that my customers want to see their kink represented and seen as normal. So in the videos I make them, I'm a woman who's into roll neck sweaters or plastic suits or Wellington boots, because I guess they want to see their kink reflected in someone else, which is a very human, normal instinct. And the other thing that I think is a recurrent theme is that people want to be appreciated for who they are. So often they want me to say their name as part of the video. They want to feel like they're part of the scene and that I'm interested in their sexual tastes. So whatever that is, whether it's drinking a fizzy drink out of a plastic cup or covering my face in golden syrup, the point of the video is to take part in their sexual activity and appear to enjoy it. I refuse a lot of requests, either because I find it personally distasteful or because I don't think I can do a good job. So, for example, I'm really sensitive to cold. So if people want me to get into an iced bath, for example, I would just say no, because I know I'm not the right person to do that. And it's difficult turning down custom videos because the act of saying no, I'm aware might make my customer feel really judged. But on the other hand, there are things that I don't feel would be responsible of me to shoot. An example of this that does occasionally come up is if I was going to appear to die in the video. I just think that's too serious a subject for me to be comfortable to represent it. And maybe that's unfair because we all watch dramas all the time where people pretend to die. This is a very normal thing in drama. But I just feel like I don't know how I justify that if someone watched my video and then killed themselves, for example. So that is something I would definitely say no to. I would also say no to appearing to be threatening someone's life. So I wouldn't want to make a video where I was saying I was going to shoot someone or anything like that. So most of my clients, I guess, are a self-selecting group because they have to speak reasonable English, because I can only speak English and a little tiny bit of Welsh. So I don't hear much from people who don't have some level of decent written English. So a lot of my customers are British, a lot of my customers are American, I have some Australian customers, but I also have a lot of German customers and a lot of Japanese customers. And then I have this sort of scattering of customers from everywhere else in the world as well. So I think what that tells me is that the kind of distribution of sexual diversity is pretty even. Most of my clients are male. I do have some female clients. So sometimes I have female submissives who I think see me as, I guess, kind of like maybe an avatar who gets to go and do the things that they'd quite like to do, but they're not in a situation where they can. So they like to see me do things that they would like to experience themselves. So I do have a few female clients, including some female submissives, but yeah, mostly I guess because, again, I'm very public about liking dominant sadistic men. That's the customer base I get. I also get quite a lot of male submissives who, again, I think that because the things I do in my personal life are the things they want to do in their personal life or have done to them, they think that I'll have an understanding of it. So I might be playing a dominant in the video, but I'll be describing activities that I'm pretending I'm doing to them. And I can describe them well because I've had them done to me. So I guess there's that as well. I'm really glad to say that in the years since internet pornography has become widely available, broadly speaking, statistics show that instances of actual sexual violence have gone down. I think as someone who's putting a lot of images of female submission into the world, sexual female submission, I do feel like I've got a responsibility to make sure that my customers don't think it's real. And so something I do that I feel very strongly about is my social media presence is very feminist. Everyday sexism and violence against women in real life. And I feel like everyone has probably a responsibility to do that. But I think especially if you are putting work into the world that depicts a fantasy of kind of ritualized sexual violence of a sort, I think I have a particularly great responsibility to make sure no one thinks this is real. And so I try very hard to make sure that people understand the difference between my worldview and my sexual tastes. I mean, there must be some people for whom BDSM has absolutely no appeal, but BDSM is only one of the kinks you could have. So, I mean, I sometimes wonder if calling some people kinky or some activities kinky and some not is a bit of a misleading thing, because how are we deciding what's a kink and what isn't? I've always thought this about kind of lads mags, that you could say that they're big boob fetish, because the models that traditionally are on lads mags covers, they always do have really big breasts. But we have sort of as a culture decided that that's mainstream. That's normal. It's normal for a man to like big breasts. But if she's wearing latex, that's a kink. And, why? There's such a wide variety of things we might like sexually that possibly they're all kinks. Or possibly none of them are. They're just this wide variety of ingredients that we can choose from. And we all have a slightly different combination of things that we find sexually appealing. So maybe in the long term, that's how we'll learn to think about different people's sexual identities. Like maybe there will be no such thing as, having a sort of alternative kinky sexuality or a normal mainstream one. Because one thing I do hear from my customers a lot is that often they'll say they've never told anyone in their real life about what they're into. I'm a safe person to tell because I'm outside their social group. And I think, if we saw that change in the next 10 or 20 years, that would seem like a really healthy thing, because I know what it's like to live trying to keep your sexuality secret from everyone you know. And it's crushingly lonely. And I like the idea of living in a society, trying to help create a society where people don't feel like liking the look of women in swimsuits should be this terrible secret, or liking women in Wellington boots or enjoying putting on a latex mask. I feel like if we could stop feeling like those things should be secret, it might be quite good for us. It's often used as like a shortcut to show that there's something wrong with a character, especially if they're dominant or sadistic. So I can think of several examples where someone's a psychopath, and the way the filmmaker shows us that that person is a dangerous serial killer is that they have some BDSM equipment lying around. So I hope that's not very realistic. I mean, that seems like a really kind of phobic way of representing a group of people. That said, I think there are some nice depictions that I think are fairly realistic. I think that the movie Secretary, which came out, I guess, about 20 years ago, I thought that was a really decent, respectful representation of a kinky couple. It's not like they'd figured everything out. They were a bit dysfunctional, but I think it was quite a sympathetic portrayal. So, yeah, I think we might have a way to go before BDSM is represented exactly as I would like to see it in mainstream film. But I do think we're getting there. And for all the criticisms of the 50 Shades of Grey books and movies, I do think that it did change things in mainstream film, because it did show a kinky couple doing kinky things, and it was presented as romance rather than, a crime. And that feels like, okay, well, that's better than it was being represented, 20 or 30 years ago. My family do know what I do, because I thought how awful it would be if one day they came across it online and thought that I must have been really desperate for money and I'd just desperately done this thing I didn't want to do. So I thought, to be fair to them, I must let them all know the things I'm doing are as a result of what I'm into rather than just because I needed a job. So I took the decision to tell them that a long time ago. And it was quite frightening. But the thing I always want to say to people is that if you are honest, especially about something a bit embarrassing like your sexuality, it makes them feel safe to tell you stuff about their sexuality. So what I have experienced as a result of telling my family a lot about myself sexually is I've made myself a safe person for them to confide in. And that has been such a good thing for our relationships. And I'm really glad that I discovered that, because I wouldn't have necessarily expected that to be the result of it. We've had quite open, frank discussions about sexual identity, and I think that's really been healthy. My sister, who's married to a Church of England vicar, she actually does my emails for me. And I always like to think of my emails to customers coming from a vicarage. Once upon a time, I would have thought there would definitely be an expiry date on this kind of work. But then I keep getting older and I keep getting more and more booked up. I think what's more likely to happen is the kind of roles I will be asked to play will gradually change. So I've seen that over the years, that when I started, I think I wore a lot of school uniforms, cheerleader uniforms, and now I'd be more likely to be wearing a tweed skirt and a silk blouse and pretending to be a teacher. And maybe in 10 years' time that will change again. So as long as I stay healthy, I would very much love to stay in this job because it's given me such pleasure. And I know it gives pleasure to my customers and also makes them feel less alone, which is really nice. I have lots of ideas about other things I'd like to do, but there is nothing I would like to do as much as I like doing this. So my plan is to stay with this until I retire from work altogether.